Welcome to the Journal Editorial Report. I'm Paul Gigot. Fired FBI Director James Comey made his much-anticipated return to Capitol Hill this week, appearing Thursday before the Senate Intelligence Committee. In his testimony, Comey described his interactions with the president, specifically a February meeting with Mr. Trump in the Oval Office, as disturbing and concerning, but stopped short of accusing the president of obstructing justice.
I don't think it's for me to say whether the conversation I had with the president was an effort to obstruct. I took it as a very disturbing thing, very concerning, but that's a conclusion I'm sure the special counsel will work towards to try and understand what the intention was there and whether that's an offense.
Michael Mukasey served as the 81st Attorney General of the United States under President George W. Bush. Judge, welcome.
Good to be here.
So let's focus first. I want to focus first on what's the appropriate behavior for a senior Justice Department official like the FBI director in interacting with the President of the United States. Because when you go into the Oval Office, it's an intimidating thing, I guess. How is he supposed to behave when the President pulls him aside and says something like he said with Judge Michael Flynn?
The same way he would behave anyplace else. Yes, the idea of the Oval Office is intimidating. It may be, in fact, intimidating for the first few times you're there, for the first 15 minutes. If you've been a U.S. attorney in 2 districts, if you've been the Deputy Attorney General, if you've been for a number of years the Director of the FBI, and you're intimidated by being in the Oval Office, you're in the wrong job.
So how should he have reacted to that?
If he thought what he says he thought, then he should have said, Mr. President, we can't have this conversation.
And he said he thought he was being directed to shut down that portion of the probe, the Flynn probe. He should have said, we can't have this conversation and talk to the Attorney General?
Sure, talk to the Attorney General. I don't think that it would have been reporting a crime, but he should have talked to the Attorney General immediately, simply so that somebody else was aware of what had happened when everybody left the room.
What about this idea that James Comey has talked about? He used the word. He said the FBI has traditionally been independent of the executive branch. Yeah. Is that real? Is that true?
No, it's not true. The FBI is in the executive branch, and it is not independent. There's a very funny story about Ramsey Clark when he first became AG. Showed up on a Saturday and wearing a sport jacket and was stopped in the hall by a watchman who said, "Can I see your ID?" So I'm the Attorney General. So no, that's fine. Show me your ID. He said, no, I'm the Attorney General. He said, I don't care if you're J. Edgar Hoover himself. Show me your ID. That's some people's idea of the FBI being independent, but it's not.
So the FBI director and the Justice Department are part of the executive branch. They're subject to the political accountability of the President of the United States. And yet there's some tension there because you don't want political actors directing investigations or saying stop that investigation. So there is some tension. There is some art to this.
There is. You don't want political actors doing that. At the same time, if there are, for example, reasons of state why an investigation should be stopped, if somebody is investigating a relatively minor crime committed by some foreign diplomat or committed by somebody with whom, in whom the President has a much larger interest, he'd be perfectly proper in saying, I want that investigation shut down. There are bigger things at stake here.
Was the President's behavior, in your mind, improper? I'm not saying illegal. I'm just saying improper first.
Sure.
Sure. You shouldn't have acted that way.
Yeah, you don't. I mean, there are a lot of things that you don't do, not because it's against the law, but simply because you don't do them. Okay. And that's one of them.
All right. Now, what about this question of obstruction of justice? Do you see any of that in the facts that Comey laid out?
No.
Why not?
The obstruction of justice statute, insofar as it's relevant, requires that the President have acted corruptly, unless he acted by force, which obviously he didn't. So that he acted corruptly. That means doing something lawful by an unlawful means, or doing something unlawful. He didn't do either one of those. It wasn't that he took a bribe in order to shut down the investigation. Right. It wasn't that he offered a bribe in order to shut down the investigation. He acted apparently out of concern for Flynn, perhaps even out of concern for himself. That's not corruptly.
But what about the chain of events, which is that he said, I would hope let this go. And then later, some months later, he fired Comey. Is that a kind of chain of events that he was trying to shut down the probe by firing Comey?
If you want to shut down the probe, you don't shut it down by firing somebody to whom the people who are conducting the probe report.
I think that's been proven by the fact of all the uproar about
Correct.
this.
I mean, it's just not. That's just not the way you shut down a probe.
But if Comey is kind of having it both ways here. On the one hand, he says, look, I felt directed to shut down the probe. On the other hand, I'm not saying it was an obstruction of justice. But if he really felt it was directed, okay, he was being told, look, you must do this. Didn't he have an obligation to go back to the Justice Department, tell his superior at the Attorney General, and maybe tap out a resignation letter saying, I cannot work for somebody who's directing me not to investigate something?
That's certainly an alternative. And in fact, you recall when he was Deputy Attorney General, he had that famous hospital scene.
Yes.
He did threaten to resign unless they changed the program.
Right. I think he typed out the letter there in advance of that meeting.
Right. And in fact, he was joined with the man who was now supposedly investigating all of this, Robert Mueller. The two of them both threatened to resign.
That is right. And then Comey clearly said, but if Comey had said, I believed it was obstruction at the time, then he really would have had to have talked to the Attorney General and maybe resigned, threatened to resign.
Right.
You would think he would.
Right.
What do you make of him going back to the FBI as he testified, telling half dozen or 10 colleagues about this, and then keeping it quiet? Essentially sticking his notes into a drawer and then keeping it quiet from everybody until he was fired.
That's what's known as having an ace in the hole. He not only did he create a memo, he created a memo that was by design not classified so that he could have it leaked eventually, gave it to somebody else to leak so that he wouldn't have his fingerprints on it immediately, and assured that, according to his own statement, that a special prosecutor, a special counsel would be appointed. That's an extraordinarily devious thing to do.
Okay. But bottom line, if, based on the facts we know now, there is not an impeachable offense or an indictable offense in what we learned.
An impeachable offense is what Congress says is an impeachable offense.
It's a political act. It's
a political act, and it's gross neglect of duty or gross abuse of power. Needn't be a crime.
Right.
I don't think this rises to an impeachable act, but that's for Congress to decide. It is not a crime.
All right, Judge, thanks very much for being here. Appreciate it.
Good to be here.
All right, much more to come as we break down the Comey testimony. So should the former FBI director have voiced his concerns about President Trump earlier or even resigned? Our panel weighs in next.
Why didn't you stop and say, Mr. President, this is wrong. I cannot discuss this with you.
It's a great question. Maybe if I were stronger, I would have.
At the time, did you say anything to the president about that is not an appropriate request, or did you tell the White House counsel that is not an appropriate request? Someone needs to go tell the president that he can't do these things?
I didn't, no.
Okay. Why?
I don't know. I think, as I said earlier, I think the circumstances were such that I was a bit stunned and didn't have the presence of mind. And I don't know, I don't want to make you sound like I'm Captain Courageous. I don't know whether even if I had the presence of mind, I would have said to the president, sir, that's wrong.
Florida Senator Marco Rubio Thursday questioning why former FBI Director James Comey didn't immediately report his concerns about President Trump's behavior to the White House counsel's office. Let's bring in Wall Street Journal columnist and deputy editor Dan Henninger, Washington columnist Kim Strassel, and editorial board member Joe Rago. So Dan, does this self-description of Comey's behavior, I didn't have the self-possession to address the president directly and tell him this isn't appropriate, does that wash in your mind?
I don't think it washes. It doesn't wash in my mind, Paul, but more importantly, does it wash in the minds of the American people, everybody who watched that? I would include even Democrats. Look, there was something about the Comey narrative that just didn't quite add up, and that exchange with Senator Rubio was a perfect example. I mean, virtually everybody listening to his description of what went on in the Oval Office, and certainly anybody who's been around Washington, would have said, something improper happened there. You're the director of the FBI, and he could have walked out of that office, gone over to the White House counsel, Don McGahn, and said, The president has just done something improper. Let me tell you, you have to go in and explain to him that this sort of thing can't happen, or even have gone to the Attorney General. And to say, I don't know, I was so startled, strains credulity.
Well, if he didn't want to go to the White House counsel's office because he thought, oh, well, maybe the White House counsel's intimidated by the president, the Attorney General of the United States is his immediate superior. The Deputy Attorney General is the immediate superior, but then the Attorney General. And you should do that. And he said he didn't want to do that because he thought, Joe, that the Attorney General was going to recuse himself from the Russia probe. Well, did he know that at the time?
Right. I mean, that's the big question. How did he know that? It's another.
He couldn't have known. Because he recused himself 2 weeks later, right?
Right. I mean, unless he's a fortune teller. But his whole narrative is sort of, I was so stunned, I just couldn't, I didn't have the composure to do anything. But then he goes back, he writes a memo to himself, he discusses it with a half dozen of his senior deputies, and then reserves all this information for himself, doesn't inform the public, doesn't tell any of his superiors. It just doesn't add up.
All right, let's take a clip of an exchange with Senator Rich and Jim Comey.
I mean, this is the President of the United States, with me alone, saying, I hope this. I took it as, this is what he wants me to do. Now, I didn't obey that, but that's the way I took it.
You may have taken it as a direction, but that's not what he said.
Correct. That's what
He said, I hope.
Those are exact words, correct.
You don't know of anyone that's ever been charged for hoping something. Is that a fair statement?
I don't, as I sit here.
Kim, that's crucial to this question of obstruction, as Judge Mukasey made clear. I mean, do you think that looking at all of this, there is, I mean, the Democrats are obviously, many of them, going to say this is obstruction. But what about the ultimate impact here? Is that going to play politically, do you think?
No, I don't. I mean, they're going to try to make it, but this was a pretty devastating blow that Jim Comey ultimately made to the Democratic case that there was obstruction. Because you look at the exact words, and he has them down there in black and white, and even he had to admit under testimony that the clear meaning of those words, hope, was not a direction. He could take it the other way, and Democrats can make a big fuss over that, but it's pretty clear-cut on a piece of paper.
All right, Dan.
Yeah, I want to add one point here. Judge Mukasey just explained to us that impeachment is a political decision, right, by the House of Representatives. And the Democrats have been trying to run this offense against Donald Trump as a political event. Jim Comey's appearance was one of the most melodramatic political events in Washington in years. And it just didn't live up to its billing. He did not make the case for them in the way they wanted to, that the president had done something in violation of the law.
All right, but there's still political damage, Joe. I agree with Dan's overall summary, but there was. I mean, he called him a liar. Trump was, you know, if you want to read the worst into it, Trump was trying to kind of subtly imply, hey, do me a favor here, you know, and there was a couple of exchanges. Comey described him as a sort of patronage relationship. Where I don't believe Comey is, he's not a babe in the woods. As Judge Mukasey said, this guy is he's a bare-knuckle bureaucratic fighter who knows how to really put presidents in their place, frankly.
Right. I mean, look, Judge, this is a guy, consummate professional, who's caused crises in every administration in which he served. You had the Bush administration over wiretapping under Obama. You had the Hillary Clinton email investigation and his improper exoneration of her in the summer, and now this. It leads me to believe that you're exactly right, that he knows what he's doing. When Trump had this kind of Tony Soprano-like behavior, like maybe this case it'd be nice if it went away. Comey was probably thrilled. This is exactly the kind of material that he can use as political insurance.
And he went back and typed out that memo and kept it as a kind of form of political insurance. Never know when you're going to need that, right?
No, and he said explicitly that he leaked it in the hopes of prompting a special counsel.
And we want to get into that in the next block. When we come back, the White House goes on offense in an effort to move beyond the Russia probe and keep the president's agenda on track. But is their strategy a smart one?
No collusion. No obstruction. He's a leaker, but we want to get back to running our great country.
Mr. Comey has now finally confirmed publicly what he repeatedly told President Trump privately. That is, that the president was not under investigation as part of any probe into Russian interference. Mr. Comey's testimony also makes clear that the president never sought to impede the investigation into attempted Russian interference in the 2016 election.
That was President Trump's personal attorney, Mark Kasowitz, Thursday, responding to James Comey's appearance on Capitol Hill. The president himself tweeted Friday, quote, "Despite so many false statements and lies, total and complete vindication." And wow, Comey is a leaker. We're back with Dan Henninger, Kim Strassel, and Joe Rago. So, Kim, I want to address this question of leaks first. And we have Asad of Comey talking about how he directed a leak of his memos. Let's look.
The president tweeted on Friday, after I got fired, that I better hope there's not tapes. I woke up in the middle of the night on Monday night, because it didn't dawn on me originally, that there might be corroboration for our conversation. There might be a tape. And my judgment was I needed to get that out into the public square. And so I asked a friend of mine to share the content of the memo with a reporter. Didn't do it myself for a variety of reasons, but I asked him to because I thought that might prompt the appointment of a special counsel.
Kim, that's pretty remarkable. Not the fact that he leaked through a cutout. That happens all the time in Washington. We should tell our viewers that. But the fact that Comey said he deliberately leaked it to trigger a special counsel probe.
The deliberateness of it, also the ease with which he describes the process that he went through to leaking, because this is now part of the discussion in Washington is, was this the first time that he did this? You know, if you think back and you step back, the last 6 months of drama, almost all of it has come from anonymously sourced stories, often mostly wrong, but from different members of the intelligence community. And it's a very disturbing question about where all of these are coming from, and I think it opens a new question into Comey himself and whether or not he's ever even done this before.
Yeah, well, it sounds to me like he's looking for political. I mean, he really does. He wants Mueller to be able to nail Trump. That's the implication I take out of this. He wanted that special counsel, and he has teed Mueller up to be able to conclude that there was obstruction of justice. That's how I read it.
Look, if you want to be really cynical, you could make the argument he never corrected the president about what the appropriate behavior should be. Instead, he went and took all of these secret memos, kept building up this dossier, and then now he's tossing it all over to Bob Mueller. Maybe this was his goal all along, to bring down a president.
And Dan, I don't think there are tapes. Remember when Donald Trump tweeted that better watch out if there are tapes, and Comey referred to that in his clip there. But the Kasowitz is denied flat out that Trump ever asked for loyalty. So I doubt that there are tapes.
Yeah, it doesn't look like it, and it seems like the loyalty oath is a sort of subset minor issue here. But there's a couple of things that have gotten sort of joined here that I think need to be separated. Comey established that Trump was not the target of an investigation involving the Russian penetration of the campaign. What was involved in this conversation was the probe of Michael Flynn. Right? And the Michael Flynn probe is not the Russian probe. Flynn may be involved in that, but these are two separate things. And so if he has established that the president was not a target, now we know that as a matter of fact, unless at some point further on the new special counsel decides to pull the president into it. But I think that was the big thing that Donald Trump was looking for.
We also have something that came up regarding the the Obama administration. The Loretta Lynch was involved here. Let's listen.
At one point, the Attorney General had directed me not to call it an investigation, but instead to call it a matter, which confused me and concerned me.
He said he felt queasy about that, but went ahead and described it as a matter anyway. What do you make of that? Sounds like there was a little political pressure in the Obama administration for Comey to downplay the email probe.
Well, the contradiction here is that even as Comey sort of conjures up the independent FBI, which you know, a sovereign law enforcement agency is antithetical to democracy and political accountability. But if he truly thought the FBI was independent, then Loretta Lynch's political interference in the Clinton investigation should have prompted the exact same kind of blow-up that he had over Donald Trump and the Russia investigation, that it didn't suggest that he was more concerned about preserving his job than his professed principles.
So bottom line here with all of this, it seems to me, is that this didn't live up to the political hype, but it did do some harm to Trump. But the real threat to him now, to Trump's presidential future, is Robert Mueller and the special counsel probe, because we never know where that can go. And clearly, Comey was teeing Mueller up to maybe do some damage to the president. All right, still ahead, Britain's general election ends in a hung parliament in a stunning setback for Prime Minister Theresa May's Conservative Party. So what does it mean for Brexit talks? We'll have a report from London next. That's a stunning upset in the United Kingdom's general election Thursday, with British Prime Minister Theresa May's Conservative Party losing its majority in Parliament. The vote coming just days after Britain's third terror attack in less than 3 months, putting national security front and center in the campaign's final week. Wall Street Journal editorial page writer Sohrab Ahmari joins us from London. Welcome, Sohrab. So Theresa May is going to try, despite being in a minority now, going to try to form a government anyway with the help of the Irish Unionists. Is she going to be able to pull that off?
Well, the Queen has authorized her to try to do that. Obviously now the ball is in her court to be able to, first of all, get a firm commitment from the Democratic Unionist Party, this small Northern Irish Unionist Party, and then to be able to both convince them and then to be able to convince her fellow Tories that she's the person to lead the party, and then it all goes to Parliament. So it's going to be a mess, and whatever government emerges, and there's still a good chance that Theresa May will remain Prime Minister when the dust settles, will be fragile and weak and vulnerable.
Yeah, she went into this election, she didn't have to call it until 2020. She went into this thinking, okay, I'll get a much bigger majority because I got a 20-point lead over Labour. Jeremy Corbyn isn't even popular with Labour voters, all of Labour voters, so this is the perfect time to strike. It seemed, I guess, a reasonable bet, but how can she stay as Prime Minister and leader of the party after she led them into an election against Corbyn and lost seats?
Well, that's why I think the Tories are actually notoriously brutal, the activist base of the party, once they feel that a Labour leader is ineffective. Right. So unlike the Labour side, which for years had hung on to Jeremy Corbyn, who was seen as unelectable, but now he feels triumphant, the Tories tend to be pretty ruthless with leaders that they feel that aren't working out. So I wonder if, I imagine, and in fact I'm certain that the processes are underway to try to think of alternatives, whether that means bringing George Osborne back to put forward a more traditionally pro-growth, limited government-type Toryism, as opposed to Theresa May's vision of quote-unquote working-class Toryism that emphasizes communitarian solidarity and goes after the big bad business practices and so forth.
George Osborne,
or could it be Boris Johnson? I don't know. It's all very fluid.
George Osborne was the Chancellor of the Exchequer under David Cameron. Now he's out of Parliament, and even a practicing journalist, God forbid. I don't know if he wants to get back into politics. But so how did she lose a 20-point lead?
Well, I think there's a couple of factors. One is I think that the Brexit focus that her government put forward had become tiresome, in the sense that Brexit was in some ways a settled question, and yet the focus of her government was, we're going to be tough in Brexit negotiations, whereas where she came short was putting forward a vision of, okay, what would a post-Brexit Britain look like? And to the extent that she put forward a vision, as I mentioned, it was this idea put forward by a clever but now seemed to be a discredited campaign guru named Nick Timothy, who suggested that the Toryism should return to a kind of pre-Thatcher era of emphasizing social solidarity, being okay with raising taxes, and all about regulation, in fact, when government needs to step in when business and markets fall short.
All right, we had
and that vision
didn't work.
Didn't really find buyers.
We got the terror attacks in the last 2 weeks. What role did that play? Theresa May had been Home Secretary, which is the equivalent of Homeland Security Secretary here. Did that help or hurt her?
Well, I spoke with party insiders ahead of the election, and they were so confident that the fact that the country seems to be facing, frankly, a low-grade Islamist insurgency with 3 attacks in 72 days, that would help her because for all her other shortcomings, she put herself forward as the steady hand. She wouldn't engage in debates about these issues of security precisely because it allowed her, I think she thought, to stay above the fray and appear like the Prime Minister, whereas let the rest of them duke it out in these petty forums and petty debates. And so all of that taken together, I thought, and they thought, would ensure a victory for her because she was facing a guy who, frankly, calls Hamas and Hezbollah friends, who wants to disarm Britain's national security apparatus, who doesn't believe in the shoot-to-kill policy when there are terrorists on the streets and so forth. So, given that, they thought that she would do well with it. And maybe the reason she didn't do as bad as it could have been was because of the national security shortcomings of Corbyn.
All right. Well, one of the lessons here is you cannot take voters for granted. They often surprise you. So still ahead, amid the Comey furor on Capitol Hill, the GOP fights to keep its agenda on track. So could Senate Republicans unveil their health care bill as early as next week?
Across America, premiums are skyrocketing, insurers are fleeing, and the American people are paying much more for much worse coverage. Obamacare is in a total death spiral, and the problems will only get worse if Congress fails to act. Obamacare is dead.
President Trump Wednesday urging Congress to act on plans to repeal and replace Obamacare as Senate Republicans continue to hash out their bill behind closed doors. Majority Leader Mitch McConnell reportedly told the president this week that a vote could come by July 4th. Pressure is mounting on the GOP as Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield announced this week that it will pull out of the health care exchanges in many Ohio counties next year, citing growing uncertainty over the law's future. We're back with Dan Henninger, Kim Strassel, and Joe Rago. So, Joe, how much progress are the Senate Republicans making behind the scenes?
They're making a lot of progress in the sense that they've studied this issue more than any other. Everybody says they're working as well together as they ever have.
Wow, that's saying something.
That's progress.
It's a fractious bunch.
And look, at this point, they know what the policies are. They know what the trade-offs are. It's time to make a decision.
So, and the trade-offs are all geared from McConnell's point of view. You get to 50 votes.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, what are the problems here, the disputes here about how rich to make the subsidies for the assurance on the exchanges, how much, what to do with Medicaid in particular, how much authority you give back to the states, and how much money you pay in Medicaid going forward from the federal government, and then how many of the taxes in Obamacare to cut.
Right. I mean, it's all about kind of turning those dials. How long of an off-ramp do you have? Do you maybe preserve some of the taxes in order to make the subsidies more generous? Ultimately, I think Leader McConnell, he's going to make a prudential decision about what can get to a majority, put it on the floor, have a vote, have accountability. And what he's been telling members is we can either vote for this, defend a success, or we can apologize for a failure. And if we're going to fail, you're going to have to produce a body. If you're going to kill this, we're going to have a vote.
You're going to have a vote. And Kim, if McConnell, I think, is also telling his members, look, if we don't do something on this, Obamacare is going downhill, sliding. We may end up having a debate among ourselves in the next year or so about how to bail out these exchanges. And if we make this an issue in 2018 and 2020, what's going to happen is the Democrats, if they get power next time, they're going to make the same mistake as Obamacare again. They're going to go with single payer.
Yeah, he's right. I mean, this is the point to make, because this is not just, by the way, long-term political consequences. You see it happening already. As you get more news, like what happened with Anthem this week, you already see Democrats, they're developing new talking points. They are out there saying, look, all of this problem you see in the healthcare market, it isn't because of Obamacare, it's because of the uncertainty that is being caused by Republicans not doing anything in terms of their reform on the healthcare bill. So there is an urgency for them to get something out and send a message to the markets to help calm things before this message gets dug in with the left and the public.
All right. Rand Paul, Kentucky senator, looks like he's not going to vote for anything here. So that just gives one vote to spare. Really narrow margin for McConnell, because Democrats have decided they're going to try to oppose everything that Trump does.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot at risk right here. And, you know, the Republicans are trying to do something on the substance. One of the most interesting things is they would like to move responsibility for Medicaid out into the states. And there are some interesting things going on.
With some still federal funding.
With some federal funding.
Substantial federal funding.
But the states are already trying to experiment with Medicaid. Just this week, the Nevada legislature passed a bill that would allow people in Nevada to pay to get into Medicaid if they wanted to, either use Obamacare credits or your own money, if that's what you want to do. I think it was a bad idea, but it sounds like an interesting experiment. Indiana allows people to put aside money who are on the poverty line to buy their own private insurance. It's been working very well in Indiana. So I think the Republicans have something they can argue on behalf of, that the states are better equipped to handle something this complex.
Joe, and in the bill that McConnell's putting together, it's not going to be as conservative as the House bill, but it's going to have substantial conservative victories in terms of substantial tax cuts, devolution of the entitlement, the most substantial reform of Medicaid in a long time, maybe ever, and significant reform of the exchanges. The question is, will conservatives accept that as enough?
Yeah, that is the big question. Are they going to decide to govern, to make directional progress on their policy goals, or try to defeat this? I think that's a real question. When you had the House bill come out first, the right hit it hard. They're going to have to, I think, be more pragmatic in this case to have any hope of forward advance.
All right, Joe, thank you. When we come back, President Trump unveils a plan to privatize America's air traffic control system, what it could mean for your future flights.